Good morning, friends. It's 7 a.m. on the homestead, and I decided to go ahead and film a June garden tour before the temperatures start soaring again today. If you're new here, my name's Audrey, and my husband and I have 8 children, and we live on a 6.5-acre homestead in the Midlands of South Carolina. We've had record-breaking temperatures over the last week and a half. One day last week, the heat index was 116 degrees. So we've been using our drip irrigation to heavily water the garden every morning for about an hour. This tray is full of big slicer tomatoes. They're all heirloom, and I'm excited to put them in the place where my winter squash was, but has now already been taken over by squash bugs. Let's head into the garden. Our garden is double the size this year than it has been in the last couple of years, and I knew that would mean a lot of extra work. You can see here the weeds have taken over. I go out and pull weeds a couple of times a week for at least an hour, sometimes 2, but I just cannot stay on top of it. Our garden this year is almost 2,000 square feet. This is our 30-foot row of sweet potatoes, but it is also overrun with wild zinnias and volunteer ground cherries. This row is about a 50-foot row of bulb onions on that right side, along with more tomatoes on the left. On the right here, you see more tomatoes, and on the left, we have a 50-foot double row of potatoes. Here is our bean tunnel. Our green beans have done excellent this year. I have canned 6 quarts of beans so far, and our sweet peas are most definitely done, but I left them on the vine so we could save the seeds. Our yellow squash is the last surviving squash in our garden right now. It is still doing pretty well. I'm pulling squash every couple of days, and we've already enjoyed a big squash casserole, one evening of fried squash and zucchini, and of course, hibachi night. This 50-foot row on the inside perimeter of our garden fence is where I had over a dozen winter squash that did really well for the first month and a half of the garden. However, pests took over and I quickly lost all of my winter squash, but not before harvesting over a dozen spaghetti squash, butternut squash, and acorn squash. Next year, I will have to find an entirely different area on our property to plant squash. I've been really pleased with our basil this year. I just cut quite a bit last night to make a shrimp and pasta dish by the Pioneer Woman, which will be in my upcoming What's for Dinner video. The rest of this row is full of ground cherries and one giant volunteer zinnia plant. This year is completely experimental when it comes to the ground cherries. I've never planted this many before, and I've never made pie filling with it before, but that is my intent, is to possibly make some jam and definitely make quite a bit of ground cherry pie filling. So if it is a hit and the taste is good, that will be a pretty big game changer for fruit on our homestead. Ground cherries are incredibly prolific. They can produce up to 300 cherries per plant. My kids have been collecting them in the evenings. They bring them into the kitchen, remove all the husks. Then they add the cherries to a 2-gallon bag that we have in the freezer. Once the bag is full, we'll be ready to preserve. This has definitely been the best year we've ever had for melons. So far, we've already harvested 1 sugar baby watermelon and 1 cantaloupe. They've both been incredibly sweet and juicy, and so far we haven't had any pest issues. This is one of our sugar baby watermelons. They are a little on the smaller side, but they're ultra sweet. And these are just your standard watermelons that you would find in the grocery store. Our cantaloupe is also doing very well. Did you know that a cantaloupe is ripe when you can smell it as you're holding it? Also, the little belly button on the end is soft. This is my row of peppers. I have quite a variety of peppers this year, and I'm afraid not many of them are bell peppers, which I regret. I may actually see if I can find a couple of bell pepper plants at the garden center. I actually didn't have very good luck with my peppers this year when I started them in the greenhouse. About 80% of the ones you see in my garden came from my friend Jess over at Roots and Refuge Farm. I went over to her place a couple of months ago for a hand milking lesson with her cow, and she generously sent me home with a whole tray of leftover pepper plants. That girl can grow some food. The kids and I decided to dig up about a 10 to 12 foot row of our potatoes last week. We've gotten 30 pounds so far. I love this burgundy okra, although I was disappointed to discover that it turns green like the rest of okra once you put it in boiling water. Once your okra plants begin to produce, you've got to be on it daily. It grows so fast and it doesn't take long to go from delicious and tender to woody and inedible. I love planting flowers in the garden that are natural pest deterrents. This variety of marigold, which is multiple varieties, are doing really well. I've never had so much success with marigolds that I've started from seeds before, but these are beautiful. Unfortunately, my nasturtium did not have as much luck surviving. My tomatoes are doing incredible this year. I have about 85 plants, and they are mostly San Marzano and Amish paste, which are both Roma varieties. I have 2 different varieties of cucumber this year. This Boston Muncher, which is only about 4 to 6 inches long, and they're great for fresh eating and making pickles. And I also planted 2 different long varieties. I believe this one is called China Jade, but my favorite by far is the Japanese long. Last week we pulled one that was 18 inches long. A few weeks ago, one of my daughters topped our onions for me. That's when you cut off the top 5 or 6 inches so that the tops don't fall over, signaling the bulbs to quit growing. Most of them are doing pretty well. I always have a handful that stay small and don't end up being a very good harvest, but I think this year is going to be a great harvest. Every day, our basket looks about the same, quite a bit of cucumbers and a whole lot of tomatoes. We usually have one basket that's going in the kitchen and one that will go to the chickens. This is a volunteer sunflower that came up right next to one of our cattle panels in the garden. I decided to let it grow since it wasn't disturbing any other plants. It's incredible and is already almost 10 feet tall. I'm not sure what variety this is, but it has sunflowers coming off of the shoots all up and down the entire plant. I cannot wait until all of these blooms begin to open. It's going to be absolutely stunning right in the middle of the garden. My chickens love me this time of year. They come running every time they see me walking toward them with a basket of scraps for them. Their very favorites are definitely tomatoes, and I've had plenty to give them as we've had issues with blossom end rot, which is usually a calcium deficiency that I'm working on fixing, but also we've just had some caterpillars and random pests. It's always nice to be able to supplement your chicken feed or any of your animals on your farm with garden leftovers and kitchen scraps. A big goal I had this year with our garden is to save as many seeds as possible. All of the fruits and vegetables we plant are either organic, heirloom, or both. I ordered some self-sealing seed envelopes on Amazon, and I've already harvested seeds from our lettuce that went to flower, our sweet peas that dried up on the vine, and our sugar baby watermelon that we harvested about a week ago. I'm really excited to save seeds from our pole beans, our tomatoes, our peppers, even our ground cherries. It's been really fun trying to figure out new ways to become more and more self-sustaining and having to rely just a little bit less on outside resources. Every year I have a goal of keeping track of our harvest, but always fall short when I get overwhelmed, as all the vegetables start to come in at once. This year I have started weighing the harvest every day and taking a picture of the scale. That way at the end of the season I can simply go back through those pictures and add up the totals. This is what I was able to harvest from our winter squash before the bugs took over. I've been placing my mostly ripe tomatoes on windowsills all over the downstairs to finish ripening. Since we've had such an issue with bugs and extreme heat, I've been pulling some of my tomatoes when they're just yellowy orange and letting them finish ripening on the windowsill. When they turn red, I add them to these 2-gallon bags in the freezer, and when they're all full and I have a full day to devote to them, I will begin canning. As a reminder, we are in Zone 8A, and I began almost all of my seeds in the greenhouse this year for the first time. That allowed me a really nice head start on the garden. I'd love to hear where you're at and how your garden is doing. Thanks for watching.